Welcome, everyone, to Restorative Justice 102. Thank you for joining us. Last week, we had Restorative Justice 101, which was a great success and shined a wonderful light on this very serious and dangerous topic. And our two speakers, Max Eden and Ryan Petty, gave a very good overview of the perspectives on restorative justice, one from a father's perspective who's lost his daughter to this ideology, and the others from an education policy expert standpoint, from the American Enterprise Institute and the Manhattan Institute. But 102, Restorative Justice 102, is really going to serve to acquaint you and educate you on what it looks like and what the terms are, the nuts and bolts, and how to recognize it in the schools. So generally what it is and generally what the effects are, but let's identify it in practice. So without further ado, I am Robin Steenman. Well, I'll get to my introduction, and then Scarlin is going to give her presentation from Parents Defending Education. We'll get a teacher's perspective from Ryan, and then I will cover, is it here in Williamson County, and then we'll close it out. So for those who don't know me, I am the chapter chair of Moms for Liberty, Williamson County. I'm an Air Force veteran. I flew the B-1. I was in for 11 years of active duty. I've been married for 12 years, and I'm the mother of 3 to a 2, 6, and 8-year-old. This event is part of our year-long 2022-2023 school year for parents. And what we're seeking to do is just really break these ideologies down one at a time, 1 month at a time, and make it so that parents can digest and get smart on one issue at a time before we move on to the next. Otherwise, when you look at this whole list of ideologies that our children are 100% facing in the classroom, it's very overwhelming. So this month in January, our focus is on restorative justice. And I made this video for Restorative Justice 101. I'm going to go ahead and show it in case you haven't seen that video, and you can watch it now because it really sets the stage for what we're talking about.
We know that Latino kids are almost twice as likely as white kids to be suspended from school. Black kids are nearly 4 times as likely. And if a student has been suspended even once by the time they're in 9th grade, they are twice as likely to drop out. That's why my administration has been working with schools on alternatives to the so-called zero tolerance guidelines. By making sure our criminal justice system doesn't just function as a pipeline for underfunded schools to overcrowded jails, we can help young men of color stay out of prison.
This picture capturing kids trapped helplessly in a crammed hallway. 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz seen here loading an AR-15 in the hallway of Stoneman Douglas High School as a frightened freshman walks past. Moments later, Cruz killing 17 students and staff.
Oh my God! Before the authorities had released the name of the shooter, all the students knew who it was. Everybody knew who it was without even seeing it.
In a season of loss, it is difficult to find meaning in tragedy. The senseless murder of so many, including my own beloved daughter, Elena. Nicholas Cruz and the deadly danger he posed were the worst kept secrets in Parkland, with one inexcusable exception. He was kept a secret from many of the parents of the students.
And even if you were, Broward Sheriff's Union President Jeff Bell says that his school resource officer hands were tied because the schools didn't want the bad numbers. This matters far beyond Broward County. Superintendent Runcie has said, and I quote, "Some of my staff joke that the Obama administration might have taken our policies and framework and developed them into national guidelines. That's not funny because it's not a joke."
In a middle school.
2 stabbings in 2 different high schools.
And multiple fights caught on camera in buildings throughout the Akron Public School District.
Teachers every single day because they are afraid to be in the classrooms, to be in the schools.
Davis is calling for the resignation of Superintendent Dr. Calvin Watts. She says the district's new discipline policy is a catastrophe and hasn't stopped repeated acts of violence.
The student begins punching him again and again.
Me with both of his fists balled up tightly and said, "I'm not going around." And he brushed past me and he said, "F you," and exited through the door. Could I finish, please? About 2 more minutes.
Oh, we can't do 2 minutes, but if you could wrap up.
Please.
Can you wrap up your statement? Yeah.
Okay, on August 24th, I need to finish. Yeah. On August the 24th, 2021.
Ma'am, I have to be fair with everybody. If you could share your last sentence and then.
I am a teacher, and I was assaulted by a student, and you all need to do something about it because it's trying to be pushed under the carpet, okay?
We'll have staff connect with you. So
let me talk, please. The student became aggressive by pushing me hard into the steel doors and took his elbow and jabbed me very hard in my spine and back. He sent the right side of my body into the doors. I suffered multiple injuries and I still cannot get treatment for my neck, right knee, or upper back. It was unacceptable, and the student should have been arrested and charged with assault and battery with intent to commit bodily harm.
Other educators added when teachers are attacked, they are told not to report it.
It's a brutal back-to-school season across the country, spread all over social media. Police officers injured, students arrested at this high school in Florida. A 13-year-old...
Whoops. Back. He sent the right side of my body into the doors. I suffered multiple injuries and I still cannot get treatment for my neck, right knee, or upper back. It was unacceptable, and the student should have been arrested and charged with assault and battery with intent to commit bodily harm.
Other educators added when teachers are attacked, they are told not to report it.
It's a brutal back-to-school season across the country, spread all over social media. Police officers injured, students arrested at this high school in Florida. 13-year-old arrested for allegedly attacking a student with autism in California.
ED tells me no charges were filed, and also that student was not arrested.
And violence so bad, the superintendent closed the school and ordered a day of remote learning.
You're in a situation now where somebody is going to die.
We do have a child on the line. Hello. Calling with the home. Can I help you? No, there's a school shooting. see you somewhere. I told you to sit. Are you with officers or are you barricaded somewhere? I'm in classroom number 112. 112. 112. 112. What's your name now? Chloe told me to be. There's a lot of dead bodies. My dad taught me when I was a little girl. Send help when my teachers are still alive, but they're shot.
320. Go ahead with that child's information related.
Officer child is advising he is in the room full of victims at this moment.
Thank you for hanging with me on the video. But the bottom line was restorative justice. It started in the prison system. A version of it has gone into our education system. It was really spearheaded by Broward County Schools Promise program, picked up by the Obama DOE in a joint Dear Colleague letter between the Department of Education and the Department of Justice, which was later rescinded by the Trump administration after the Parkland shooting investigation. But you'll find that it really is still there. Once you create bureaucracy, once you attach strings to funding, it's very hard to undo that once it's in the system. It jeopardizes student and teacher safety. It removes consequences for bad behavior. It blocks law enforcement on the school grounds, and it makes itself look good with skewed statistics. So for our school year for parents, what are we doing in January for restorative justice? Well, we read the book, Why Meadow Died. If you're interested in this topic, that is really the book to read, and I hope that you'll pick up a copy. It's heartbreaking and infuriating, but so very informative on this topic. Restorative Justice 101 and 102, and then we got the quiz for parents in work, and the toolkit is actually live on the website and under construction. And as far as where Williamson County Schools ranks on this topic, it's a 6 to a 7 out of 10 for the reasons listed below. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Scarlin, a public school advocate for Parents Defending Education. And she's here to tell you more about how restorative justice really works in the schools. Thank you, Scarlin.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Robin, for having me to talk about restorative justice. This truly is a topic that has gone under the radar for so long, but the implications of it are very, very dangerous, as we've seen already. So my name is Scarlin Valdez, and I am the Public School Advocacy Associate for Parents Defending Education. I also have my colleague, Ryan, joining us tonight, so he can give us a teacher's perspective of what restorative justice does within the public school system. And feel free to take notes, write down any questions that you may have, because I am more than happy to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. So for those of us who may not know who we are Parents Defending Education, and we are a national grassroots organization that is dedicated to reclaim our schools from activists that are imposing harmful agendas within our public school system across the country. My job is to specifically engage with parents and parent groups across the country and help them become empowered to re-engage in their child's public school education and help them expose any harmful agendas that they may see. We do accept tips from everyone across the country, and we do keep everyone anonymous. So if you see something, say something, feel free to send it to us on our website at defendinged.org. We will always keep you anonymous unless you choose not to be anonymous. All right. So Robin, she kind of already went through this. So what happened? Why are we even dealing with restorative justice in our public school system? So in 2014, the Obama administration's Department of Education sent a Dear Colleague letter, a very friendly worded letter, letting school districts know that if there were any disparities among suspensions and discipline within the school system, then they were going to get investigated. So if that specific school system was suspending a minority student more than white students, that they may get an investigation. And I forgot to mention, I am from Chattanooga, Tennessee, so a lot of my content, it does come from Hamilton County. Hamilton County was actually a school district that was suspending minority children more than white students. So that's how restorative justice was able to sneak into the Hamilton County School District. In 2018, the Trump administration rescinded it. It wasn't working, so they took it back. And unfortunately, the Biden administration is currently working to bring it back into our public school system. So what is restorative justice? I like to use sources from very famous big ed companies that are very well established within the school system. So Panorama Education describes restorative justice as an alternative to using punishment-based approaches to school discipline and classroom management. It's focused on repairing the harm through inclusive practices that bring together students and educators. That sounds really nice, right? Who doesn't want to restore a relationship between someone that you're having a disagreement with in school or in work or even in your personal life? It sounds very harmless. It sounds like something that's necessary. And it sounds like there wouldn't really be any implications to it. So the concept of restorative justice is based on 3 pillars: harms and needs, obligation, the need to make things right, and engagement. So if you notice, restorative justice goes into the feelings section of everything that we already have going on in our public school system. So the goal is to have empathy and awareness to understand the harm that was caused by all parties, an obligation to make things right, because why not? Why not repair the relationship with someone that wronged you? And then engaging, making sure that, all parties, the victim and the offender, the entire community is involved in the dialogue and healing process. So why restorative justice? It was created, or it was implemented in the school system to eliminate racial disparities within traditional school discipline. A lot of educators and a lot of big ed companies believe that punitive traditional discipline just doesn't work, and it doesn't get to the root cause of the behavior. And they also state that if we are suspending minority children more than white students, it's because of racism. And another reason why restorative justice is within their school system is to create student empowerment. So restorative justice is meant to empower students to create social change within their school system. And then also to break down the school to prison pipeline, because if you're not suspending the kids, if you're not letting anyone know that that a child has done something in school, then it just kind of stays in the school and no more school to prison pipeline, right? Wrong. So how do we identify restorative justice? it can get a little tricky because you know that once a term becomes well known, the terms kind of change. So the way that you can identify restorative justice within your school system is by a few terms: restorative practices, progressive discipline, PBIS, and there's also a new one called conscious discipline as well. So if you see any of that on your school district's website, if you see teachers or superintendents or principals using these terms, that means that it probably already is being implemented within your child's school. And how does it look? How does it look like inside the school? So the in-school implementation. One really obvious way to find out is a tiered school code of conduct. So if you go to your county, your school district's website, and you see a tiered school code of conduct, it's already being implemented within your school system. If you hear a superintendent, if you hear a teacher, or if you hear a counselor or anyone, a staff member at school, talk about restorative circles or restorative conferences, then it's being used within your child's school. So how does restorative justice work? It's not just a term that we say it and then it comes into existence. There are actually different phases of restorative justice and different ways that it can be implemented. The interesting thing about how restorative justice is implemented in the schools, it's actually not implemented the way that it's supposed to be implemented. Sometimes, parts and pieces are picked out, left out. Some of them are used, some of them are not used. So when there are critics of restorative justice and that we do say, hey, it's not working, the response always turns into, well, it's because it just hasn't been, tried the way it's supposed to, or the teachers didn't receive the training they were supposed to, so of course it's not working. We need more funding, or we need more staff. But if we go back to the boxes that I have here, we have proactive circles. And the proactive circles, those are meant to develop connections among students and share experiences and concerns without judgment. So this usually happens in the beginning of the school year, beginning of the class period. Everyone gets into a circle and they all start talking about, their feelings. Everyone's kind of ask questions to talk about sensitive areas in a child's life. That way everyone can have trust within each other in the classroom. And then we have respect agreements, and this is typically used at the beginning of a school semester or beginning of the school year. And this is meant to empower students to bring their true selves into the classroom while increasing their sense of belonging. So the way that this works inside the classroom is the teacher at the beginning of the year semester has a poster up in the front of the classroom, and the entire class works together on creating rules, boundaries that they're all going to agree and adhere to. And then everyone goes at the front of the classroom, everyone signs the contract, and then that's how the respect agreement begins. And then we have the dialogue circles. They're also called restorative circles. And this happens when there has been an injustice done. So someone breaks the respect agreement, a child throws a chair across the room, or a child, starts bullying, harassing, or calling another child names. Then what's supposed to happen is a dialogue circle or restorative circle. And this is meant to cultivate an emotionally safe and inclusive learning environment. The guidelines include getting acquainted, exploring values, and sharing stories about what has shaped a student's life. So the way that this looks is they all get into a circle. They start talking about, what happened, who was harmed, why they were harmed. They start asking personal questions like, hey, so has something like this ever happened in your home? Who did it? So very intrusive questions that a child might not at the top of their head think they're intrusive, but they're a child, so they're probably going to answer that question for you. And then after the restorative circle, if the incident happens again and the offender continues to misbehave or disrupt the classroom, then they might get suspended, or they might get an in-school suspension, or they might go visit the principal or the dean of students. And after that happens, we have the re-entry circle, or what's called the restorative conference. So the restorative conference is used to welcome a student that's coming back from a suspension or disciplinary action. What happens in the re-entry circle is everyone again gets into a circle, and the victim is in the circle, the offender is in the circle, the parents, the teachers, the counselors, the entire community can be invited into this circle. And it's the circle again is meant to try to repair the harm between the victim and the offender by asking questions like, well, how did you think so and so felt when you stabbed them with a pencil? Or, hey, I know that you got stabbed with a pencil, but how do you think the offender felt when they did that to you? That's kind of what it looks like. Crazy, right? But it's happening. All right, so here is how a tiered school code of conduct looks like. And if you go to your school district's website, you might have already seen something like this. This one specifically comes from the Poway Unified School District in San Diego, California. And the tier 1 is the culturally responsive environment classroom strategies with accommodation planning. And usually what happens in the tier 1 is very, I guess, benign behaviors, like, let's say a kid shouts, "Shut up," to the teacher. And so then they start the positive behavioral supports, or PBIS. The teacher has to try classroom management strategies and routines before she even calls for any type of support. Then sometimes, there can be a restorative circle if the teacher feels like it, or if she has time or he has time. And then they'll have social emotional learning lessons. You have to be fair, you have to be kind, because you just can't upset the child that just told you to shut up. And the interesting thing about the restorative circles and conferences is that where are teachers finding the time to do this? One, they're trying to manage a rowdy classroom. Two, they're probably taking a survey about how they're already feeling anyway. And then now they have to deal with a disruptive child by getting the entire class into a circle. Where are we finding the time for the academics? That's one concern that a lot of parents bring to my attention. But that's tier 1. Then we go to tier 2, and here are the at-risk students, more intense classroom behavior. So in this one, it might be, a disruptive student that's just shouting and won't stop. It might be a student that's shoving, the teacher or another student. It might be a student that's throwing a chair. Who knows? Because the tiers are really, they're not followed very well anyway. So it's really subjective. But anyway, if there is a tier 2 behavior that's hit, there has to be a team referral. Then you have to progress and monitor the data, see if there's any improvement or not. Sometimes you assign the child to a different class where they can go and take a breather and maybe meditate or do whatever makes them feel better. Then there's the peer mentoring program. So sometimes other students are trained on restorative justice so they can help their peer through whatever it is that they're going through. So a child helping a child monitor their behavior. I don't know how that works, but people that love restorative justice say it does. Then there's also a targeted small group of counseling. Sometimes there's an escape card, there's behavior contracts, and then more restorative practices. So if that child is still misbehaving, still doing whatever the heck it is that they're doing in their class, and then they hit tier 3, that's when there's more individual interventions. And again, there might be a referral to a counselor or a school social worker. You still have to continue to progress, monitor the behavior. So you have to document, and you have to You have to keep track of what's been happening with that child. So sometimes a child, when they hit tier 3, it might not be until maybe a month or two after they conducted a tier 2 behavior that they get placed to tier 3. So all of these things take time. Sometimes it can be months, sometimes it can be the entire school year. But if the child does hit tier 3 and nothing is working, the conference didn't work, the restorative circle didn't work, the peer mentoring didn't work, the escape room didn't work, then maybe it's time to talk to the principal and social workers and counselors again. And maybe this child is now considered a special needs student because they just can't, seem to control themselves. And that's where the principal and the counselors set up a 504 plan or an IEP. An IEP stands for an individualized education plan. And instead of dealing with the child's misbehavior and unruly behavior, what teachers and principals and administrators are doing is they're slapping on the special education label onto a child that's truly just being unruly and placing that child into a special needs classroom. So now the behavior hasn't been managed. Sometimes the parent hasn't even been contacted, but now they're being placed into a classroom for special needs. And that unruly child is now bullying and harassing the children with special needs. So someone help me make sense of all of this craziness, because I just cannot. As much research as I do, it doesn't make sense to me. But that's what happens with your tiered school code of conduct. And this example right here, we're going to be moving into more examples. This example comes from Rochester, New York, and it's an example of a restorative circle. So in this lesson, the teacher is to discuss or ask the students about a book that they had just read. I think that the book was about food. So this lesson plan says, ask students about their family time, dinner, favorite foods, family members, or extended family to stimulate discussion. And in parentheses, you see, your students to generate what question might be the most appropriate. And I will mention that this specific lesson is geared towards children that are of preschool age to second grade. So a preschool teacher is reading a book about food, a simple subject, food, getting the entire classroom into a circle and asking preschoolers about their favorite foods, about specific family members, about what time they eat dinner, how their family dinners look like. And I don't know about you all, but my 5-year-old would just tell everyone what happens at the dinner table, whether it be good or bad. He'll just go and tell everyone what happened at the dinner table. So what it seems like is that these teachers are being directed to ask very personal questions that have no business in how the academics of a child is going to turn out. And then if we move on to the little star right there, it says encourage students to recognize that the food helped to strengthen them for civil rights work. So again, preschool age, does a preschooler know how civil rights work? I don't think so. I can ask my 5-year-old right now and he'd be like, I don't know, just let me go watch my Pokemon. And then it says, you may want to reread the lines. No matter how many people came to dinner, there was always enough to go around, enough to strengthen, enough to comfort the family of the civil rights movement, and ask students what it means. Again, a preschooler does not know what the civil rights movement is. A second grader might not even know what the civil rights movement is. So again, help me understand how this lesson plan is going to strengthen a child's behavior at school or academics. I don't know. All right, and this example right here comes from, again, the Poway Unified School District in San Diego, California. And the Poway Unified School District, once a child has been flagged for misbehaving, they are sent to what's called a restorative justice training. And this is a 5-day training that they go through. And a part of the training includes watching videos about bullying, watching videos about racism, and then reflecting on what those videos are about and how those videos make that person feel and then other students around them. So in this one, this is a Google Docs form. So it's a survey. And this survey is meant to help the administrators or counselors at that school understand how the child that takes a survey feels or thinks about the F word. So if you see here, part 1, it says pre-education reflection, read and respond to the 7 following questions. One of the question is, have you heard this word? So has the child that's in that training used the F word? What thoughts and feelings come to mind when you hear it? Where did you learn this word from? How do you think this word impacts people who are LGBTQ+? How do you think this impacts other people? How might this word impact the school community? So again, I don't know if a child threw a chair across the room or if a child knocked the teacher out. I really don't understand how reflecting on the F word and the LGBT+ community is going to help this child no longer assault teachers or students. We can move on to the next one. All right, and this example actually comes from Georgia. So the Gwinnett County in Georgia had this training, this restorative justice training for the entire school district. And if you look at number 3, the one that's highlighted, it says that the responsibilities of the GCPS staff is an endeavor to eliminate discipline and administer behavior responses consistently, progressively, fairly, and equitably. And I'll tell you that as soon as restorative justice was implemented in the school system, the misbehavior of students and student violence skyrocketed. It became such an issue and it became so violent and dangerous that parents just decided that enough was enough, and they went to their school board meeting, they protested against it. And thankfully now in Gwinnett County, Georgia, restorative practices were placed on a pause because they just weren't working. And if you look at the bottom, this one is actually from a middle school, and it's called the East Hamilton County Middle School, I believe, here in Chattanooga. And they have the restorative justice strategies, interventions designed to identify and address the harm caused by an incident and to develop a plan to heal and correct the situation. In this specific school, the school discipline was getting so out of control that over 200 parents showed up at a school at that school's meeting, just to let the principal and the superintendent know that this wasn't going to cut it for them anymore, that they needed traditional discipline back. And thankfully they were able to get traditional discipline back into their school district or school, their specific school. All right, and this one right here comes from Hamilton County, so this is where I live. If you go to this school district's website and you go to the search bar and you just search restorative practices or restorative justice, it'll populate all of the instances where you can find restorative practices within that school district. So anytime that anyone tells you, hey, that's not being used in our school district, you can always go to the school district's website and find little tidbits of information, whether they're calling it progressive discipline, PBIS, restorative justice, restorative practices, or conscious discipline, you can find something. All right, and the interesting thing is that sometimes the school districts aren't alone in bringing restorative practices into their school district. Here in Chattanooga specifically, there are 2 nonprofits that are responsible for bringing restorative justice into our schools. One of them is Unify Ed. They actually held a pilot at an elementary school in 2019 to establish restorative justice. It was a 2-day training where a few teachers were trained on restorative practices, and those teachers, the idea was to have those teachers then go and train the other teachers and staff, but unfortunately that never happened. And Unify Ed claimed to reduce suspensions by 50%. which if you're no longer reporting suspensions and you're replacing regular traditional suspension with in-school suspension, of course your numbers are going to look good because you're no longer reporting the true data to the school district. Unified also ironically conducted a teacher survey a few months ago where the teacher cited student to teacher violence as a reason for leaving the profession. So the organization that was responsible for bringing in these practices into the school district then conducts a survey asking teachers, hey, it looks like you're leaving. Why are you leaving? Please tell me. And they cite the restorative justice that this nonprofit was responsible for bringing into our schools. And then we have Caleb. I forget what the acronym stands for, but this nonprofit essentially collects money, like bail fund money for criminals here in Chattanooga, and they received $70,000 in appropriated funds from our county commission to implement restorative practices in Hamilton County. And this was a unanimous vote. So this means that county commissioners from all parties voted to give this organization money, and there weren't any questions asked. It was a unanimous vote, and it was a pretty fast vote too, unfortunately. All right, so what can be done? This ideology it's pretty dangerous. We've seen the impacts of it, and fortunately there is something that can be done. So if you're in this meeting today, or if you're watching the recording, if you're a parent, if you're a grandparent, or if you're just a community member that is concerned, one of the things that you can do is just learn the district's code of conduct, learn the school's code of acceptable behavior, and learn the zero tolerance policies. And then ask questions. Ask that the code of conduct and zero tolerance policies be applied. Set up a meeting with your superintendent. Set up a meeting with your school's principal. Set up a meeting with your school board member and ask them if they have restorative justice or practices within their school district. And then engage your school board and superintendent with necessary. Sometimes principals and superintendents might not know the entire picture of what restorative practices do. So it's important to engage with them first before we do escalate. And if you're a school board member today, or a legislator or an educator, ask for behavior transparency within the school district. Make the school discipline data easily accessible to the public, and introduce and pass resolutions to halt or end the use of restorative practices. One interesting thing that I've noticed from just doing a ton of research on restorative justice across the country, a lot of school districts across our country have stopped reporting discipline data or putting it on their website since 2018 or 2019. So that means that they're not being transparent. And sometimes you can ask the school, you can FOIA, you can ask a school board member, you can ask a principal or superintendent for that information, and they don't want to give you that information. So we have to, again, try to understand why, and just keep asking until they make that data easily accessible to the public. And what has PDE done? So we've actually done quite a bit. In July of 2021, PDE created a portal to submit comments to let the Biden administration know that racial preferences don't belong in student discipline. In July of 2020, our president, Nicole Neely, submitted comments on the administration's request for information regarding the non-discriminatory administration of school discipline. We filed FOIA as the school districts across the country to obtain restorative justice trainings. And we've also exposed incidents submitted by parents and community members regarding restorative justice. So if you see something, say something, and we'll always keep you anonymous. And if you do want additional resources, we have questions to ask your school about discipline. And then I also sat down a few months ago with a dad in Oregon. He's from Beaverton, Oregon, and his school district has actually been implementing restorative justice for over 10 years now, and it hasn't gotten any better. So he's an expert at how restorative justice has played out within his school district, and he has a lot of knowledge about this topic. And you can always follow us. You can go on our website, defendinged.org. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can watch all of our YouTube videos. And you can always reach out to me at scarlin@defendinged.org if you have any additional questions. All righty. So that is the end of my presentation. Ryan, if you wanted to come out and just tell us, from a teacher's perspective, how has restorative justice played out in the schools that you've worked at?
Hey, Scarlett. Yeah, thanks. Hey, everybody. So I want to start here. In the fall of 21, I was a teacher down in Hamilton County, and we had a 7th grade student who at the beginning of the year threw a fellow student through a glass window. As far as I know, the consequences were in-school suspension. That student ended up getting moved into my classroom. That classroom was a constant disaster due to the students' constant disruptions, interactions with other students. He would make students nervous because he had tendency to throw things. Later that fall, that student had gotten into a hallway interaction with another female student to the point where he threatened to stab her in the eye. Later that, within a couple hours, that same student ended up stabbing the teacher in charge of ISS with some sort of blunt object, but it did make him bleed. No police were called. No actions were taken beside that kid spending a couple extra days in ISS. Things finally escalated to him getting suspended by December, where he had gotten into an interaction earlier in the month with a female student again, and he wouldn't let it go. And it finally escalated one morning to the point where he was yelling at her first period of the day that he was going to kill her. He was going to effing kill her. At that point, they finally removed him from the classroom, and they had a sit down, and then they determined that he would have to be suspended from school. That's just one example of one student. I had scissors thrown at my head by students who refused to follow directions. I have, I'm going to backtrack a little bit just to give you, I am a 3rd generation educator. I have a master's degree in elementary education, 15 years in the classroom, teaching all the way from 6th grade up through freshman in college. I also have 8 years of collegiate level coaching, so I'm no rookie. My father also was a high school dean. I was raised and born in Joliet, Illinois. For some of you, you might recognize Joliet famously for either Route 66 or for Statesville Prison. When I taught in Joliet, Illinois, back in the early 2010s, I did teach in the very low income school district there. And I taught with kids that were in and out of the prison system, or well, their parents were also, mostly their parents. And I say that because, it was illustrated earlier that this restorative justice was born out of the prison system. And what I want to do is I want to take that information and my past experience in Joliet working where things were not this bad is what I experienced under restorative practices down in Chattanooga. And I want to jump to the situation at Howard Connect at that school was that people have a good heart. Educators, probably to a fault, are too much on the harm and fairness side of the personality traits. And so when they see these kids misbehaving, they naturally want to coddle. They assume that they can be rehabilitated. But we know from long-term data that there's always 5 to 10% of kids that are just not going to follow the rules. And so what's happened is they're trying to take this system out of the prison system, which, by the way, if you use this in juvie, that might actually be effective there. We could have that debate, but the reason I say that is because you're talking about a very small, very intense therapeutic setting But now what they're trying to do is scale this inside a school setting. And one, the teachers are not certified to handle this. As Scarlett illustrated, even with professional development, it's a couple-day session. I'm going to be honest with you, with a lot of teacher trainings, if there's teachers here, you might know what I'm talking about, where people are playing on their phones, they're lesson planning, they you know, some do pay attention. And then you take that and you put that in your classroom. The problem is that we've had a problem since I first went into teaching with classroom management by teachers in general. And now you're going to ask them to do therapy on these kids. And so, you know, this whole school to prison pipeline piece is a fertile fallacy. And what that means is they've taken pieces that are true, but aren't necessarily the truth. And they package it and they sell it that as if you do this, we're going to fix all these things. And so going back to Chattanooga, in 6 months, I had scissors thrown at my head. I had that student I illustrated already. I can remember the day that I knew that I was done teaching, which is really sad. Because that day I had, they were using one-to-one computing, which is a whole problem of classroom management in itself. Then I had another student who refused to work. In fact, she was held back a year because of not doing anything a year before on Zoom. And your heart bleeds for these kids. But my hands are tied because I can't discipline kids. All I can do is get on an app and text the group chat and say, hey, I need help with this kid. And then that kid is removed. That kid is taken for timeout. Then the kid comes back. In fact, the rule was when they go to ISS, they're not supposed to do anything. They're just supposed to sit there. Then when they come back, they're kids. If you've spent any 5 minutes with a middle schooler, you know they're middle schoolers, they're kids, they're going to do kid things. And these consequences are just not going to convince a middle schooler to really change. And so these kids come back to the classroom and the classroom is more disrupted. And so, you know, I know we're set on time here. And certainly you can always reach out to me through PDE. I'm the researcher there and a writer. And you can my email is really easy. It's just Ryan, RHYEN @Defending Ed. What I really want to convey is that restorative practices in justice really disrupt the learning environment. They disrupt the teaching flow. They disrupt any possibility of learning. I want to leave you with I want to give you some stats here from a Missouri study. They found that when disruption during recall, so kid has studied something and the kid goes to do a test, for example, when there is disruption during the recall, there is a 9 to 26% loss in memory in that material. However, when there is a disruption during learning process, that elevates to 46 to 59% learning loss. And so this restorative justice program is centered around rehabilitation of these students by keeping them in the classroom. As a teacher, yes, I want to keep kids in the classroom. I want to keep them out of prison, but that's how they sucker us in. They make it sound like this fantastic thing, but in reality, it's the video you just saw at the beginning of this. It's the fact that students are slamming doors and leaving the classroom and making a scene. It's the day that I knew I was done teaching, at least for the short term, when I had an 11-year-old girl screaming in my face, kids behind me throwing things, 2 girls that just left the room on their own and just went to walk the hallway. That was the classroom for that day. Is that every day? No. But that's enough to render that day of learning useless. And we had good people in that building. I want to make clear that I think that the other issue with the teacher side of it is there's a lot of teachers that are very frustrated, but they keep being told that this is best practice and this is what you need to do to solve this problem. And so they go along with it, and to no fault of their own sometimes. And so it's really an issue that is going to take a lot of effort to solve. And I think it's simple. You go back to a traditional model and you find out what does it take to stop behaviors? And you start prioritizing the learning process of, let's say, the 90% of those kids. Because the minute that you stop these behaviors from disrupting the room, the other kids are going to comply. They're following the troublemakers because they can get away with it. But if you cut that off, that's done. Scarlett, does that help?
It does. Thank you so much. All right, Robin, if you want us to answer some questions, we definitely can.
Yes, go for it. I've got the chat up, and if you just want to unmute and ask your question, please go for it. You guys did such a good job. There's no questions.
It's all right. It's a lot of information to take in at once within hours. So we're always available for questions. You can send us an email and we're here for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I'm just speaking for myself, but there's so much good information here. It's going to just, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I've got to look at the board policies or school board policies and look for those key words to see how extensive it is in Williamson County.
Oh, definitely. Yes.
Well, I can help answer that right after this.
Okay.
So, okay. So to answer your question, is it here? And if so, to what extent? I'm going to try to keep the chat box up if anybody has a question as I go. So Scarlett did a great job of giving us the nuts and bolts of what to look for. And then Ryan, the perspective that you have is just heartbreaking. I know you go into teaching because you love it, and to have to leave for those reasons is just soul crushing, I imagine. So moving into where it is here. So I see a question. Scarlett, do you want to take that? Multi-tiered systems of support connected to restorative justice practices.
Oh, yes, most definitely, because that means that a teacher has to have a routine or classroom management strategy before they even discipline a child, no matter how crazy it can get. That tier is supposed to, I guess, give the child time to turn their behavior around, but most of the time it doesn't happen.
Okay, so, and also to answer your question, to look at this slide, so multi-tiered system of support, the MTSS, is one of those key words that you can very quickly go look for and see if it's present. It's not really present in Williamson County Schools, but it's right there on the Metro website, which is 30 minutes north in Nashville. So that's one thing that you can look for. But as far as to answer Williamson County, you have to do a little more detective work. And there's a few ways to find out. Well, one, you can start with what's the state telling Williamson County. You can get parent accounts, teacher accounts, you can do your own reconnaissance. You can do Freedom of Information Act requests, plus a little bit of digging. So when you do a FOIA, sometimes you get a thread to pull, and then it'll kind of give you a direction to go to start digging. And then look at the broader Williamson County Schools culture, and also what is the leader at the top saying about restorative justice. So to start with the state of Tennessee, this is very broad because I haven't had time to really delve into the Tennessee DOE, but upon initial survey, yeah, it's there. So this document that I just showed you, the Tennessee compilation of school discipline laws and regulations, recent as of last June, does mention restorative justice program and restorative justice discipline practices in two places in this document. And one is an alternative to suspension. And then the other one is really an alternative to exclusionary discipline for students in pre-K and kindergarten. You can also on the DOE website find this PowerPoint presentation. Ta-da! Tennessee DOE Restorative Practices Student Discipline Institute. And this is from the Office of Safe Schools. But flipping through these slides, they have the benefits of restorative practices right in the beginning. And it says that it reduces crime, violence, and bullying. So right off the bat, the first bullet is totally false, because the statistics and the evidence does not bear that out, as the video we showed at the beginning of this program. And there's a couple other slides that I pulled from. I thought the social discipline window is interesting. They always come up with a new little nuanced terms, and the compass of shame was a new one that in this thing. But basically, there's a whole PowerPoint presentation on restorative practices at the state level. Also, when you look at their support for trauma-informed learning, which is also another subset of restorative practices, this document comes up. And here in this letter from Dr. McQueen, which was the Commissioner of Education prior to Penny Schwinn, you can see in there that she's talking about multi-tiered systems of supports and how this is a good thing. Now, these documents are old. There's nothing with Penny Schwinn's name on them, but that kind of goes to Trump rescinded restorative practices. Well, that joint DOE-DOJ letter. So there's not seems to be any like new developments at the state level, but all of this stuff is still there. It's still lingering. The removal of that letter did not remove these documents. And then an MTSS, is that, one of the number one signs of restorative practices. Well, there's the state of Tennessee MTSS model. And if you look at the tier 3, it talks about discipline contracts, individualized goals and check-ins, functional communication training, counseling, therapy, psychologists. And it's just a lot of word salad is my perspective as a parent, when maybe a kid just needs some discipline. And then also, this is an older document, but I thought it was interesting. They held these trainings in 2018. So this was roughly 6 months after the Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting, when restorative justice was starting to, the parents of the Broward County schools that lost their children, they're starting to pull at that restorative justice thread. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, they're holding these trainings across the state for restorative practices. And this is something I have not had a chance to pull the thread on, but it talks about 20 million in recurring funds for FY23 and Safe Schools grants. And the schools have to apply for Safe Schools grants, and they have to meet certain numbers and thresholds, which what would that incentivize a school to do? Well, to make their numbers fit the threshold. Moving on. So big picture, yeah, it's at the state level. You can search for it and you're going to find it. So to some extent, from that joint DOE-DOJ letter, it flowed down to the state of Tennessee. It was implemented at the state level, not as seriously, not as deeply as perhaps some blue states, but it's there, and it does trickle down to, therefore, every county and every school system in Tennessee. So our next way to find out if it's here is to just listen to parents. And this is, interestingly enough, this is an anonymous letter that was mailed to us. And it talks about, it's addressed to the vice principal and principal of Jordan Elementary. And it says, this isn't over nonsense arguments with kids being kids. This is serious physical and sexual assaults. Step up or resign. This is not okay. These victims may not be your own, but they're ours. We as moms are sick to our stomach and fed up with this reputation of how you both handle severe situations. So if you want to come back to the recording of this, you can pause it right here and read the whole letter. But it's talking about some serious, dangerous disciplinary issues at Jordan Elementary. And parents are disincentivized and scared to come out and talk about these things. Thus, an anonymous letter. Thus, all these parent accounts that I have, it's hard to get somebody to put their name on it. But the rest of these that I have is things that I've gotten a phone call or I've gotten messaged about, or I've just seen on social media in other pages where a parent has gone on and said, this happened to my kid. and I took note of it. So this past fall, a parent was posting about a cafeteria fight that was apparently pretty violent and went totally unpunished, and that it seemed to be standard run-of-the-mill at their school. Also, a first grader was traumatized by a fellow first grader with, Susan, I'm going to mute you, or if you could mute, please. By telling a classmate graphic details about oral sex. And the student came home and was just absolutely traumatized, didn't want to go back to school. I mean, these are details that no child should hear. And the parent was going off saying the other child was not punished. We as parents cannot even call the parents of that other child that traumatized our child to have a talk about this. And the child's still in the class. So nothing is done. And there is a not just traumatizing, but a major loss of innocence. And a parent told me about her daughter was sexually harassed in the bathroom 2018 to 2019 and multiple times, and they reported it. She was so traumatized that she did not want to go to school. She feared for her safety, and ultimately her schedule was changed and not the offenders. Recently this month, a bullied high schooler was sent to the ER, and he is repeatedly bullied by the same students. It's been reported, nothing happens. And of course, this isn't escalation, right? If the kid ends up in the ER, it's obviously been escalating. Reports of rampant vaping and drug use at Ravenwood High School. So where's that zero tolerance policy? And then the Grassland Middle School, there was rumors of an assault from parents, but the social media threat that was referenced in that letter in the video by Carol Birdsong, talking about, yes, there's a threat over social media, but nothing to see here. I will let you be the judge, and I'll take questions at the end. So this is the social media threat that I talked about. You saw the video, and here is the communications director's email to parents. Law enforcement has determined that there is no credible threat. And that may be the case. That may be the case. But I'm going to show you some other things that might make you think maybe it's not. We have done, so for every single incident that I listed on those parent accounts, we have done a Freedom of Information Act request to get more information about it. We have not had any of those records requests fulfilled, except this one, the threat assessment flowchart. So I'll show it to you. And this is supposedly how Williamson County Schools handles threat assessments. There's step 1, step 2, and then there's levels 1, 2, and 3. So level 3 would be an intent to harm, a motive that they can identify. The threat has been repeated, and the threat is reported. Expressions of anger are pervasive. So what about that kid that got sent to the ER? The report is that he had his Chromebook broken a few times by these bullies, and nothing is being done. So I can't see that level 3 is really doing anything. But response to level 3, just as Garland talked about, you communicate to the various people, you can notify the students' parents, and then you may end up with an IEP or a 504 sending this kid to special education when maybe they're just a disciplinary problem and now they're going to go terrorize those kids. And then parent meeting for threat assessment protocol and a return to school safety plan. For teacher accounts, I don't have as many of these because teachers in Williamson County keep pretty quiet. For the social media threat FOIA, we searched keywords around May 2021. For teacher accounts, there was an incident with a high schooler who OD'd or started to OD in the bathroom, and school leadership, the protocol should have been, this kid might die, call EMS. But EMS was not called because they didn't want it to go out on the scanner, and they didn't want news vehicles, and they didn't want bad press for Williamson County Schools. There's another teacher at the Alternative Learning Center that was vacated her classroom with her students to allow a problem student free reign of destruction. And also Williamson County Schools is experiencing the same teacher exodus as we're seeing nationwide. So when I say a little bit of reconnaissance, this is what I mean. This is just parents in the schools keeping a sharp eye out, noticing the surroundings. And this parent said, oh, look, there's a restorative practice specialist listed on the care and support team of Centennial High School, and took a picture of it. And that a picture is worth 1,000 words for us, because if our records requests are not being returned, well, then here's somebody advertising their restorative practice specialty right there in the hallway. So for the records requests, we do have some, and a lot of these were returned from records requests that we did over a year ago, and these were caught up in it, and now we can use them. But as far as any of our recent records requests that have been submitted, we're still waiting. But this is an email from Josiah Holland. He's the principal of the Alternative Learning Center. And this is June 2nd of 2020. Superintendent Jason Golden sends an email out largely about human dignity and respect and whatnot in the wake of George Floyd. And Principal Holland talks about, as you probably know, restorative justice practices are of the utmost importance to me, as I've studied restorative practices extensively over the past few years and implemented circles, conferences, and mediation at the ALC. There are several ways to strengthen community on a large scale that involves restorative work. And then he talks about listening circles, and he would love to help facilitate this. And he also mentions Drayson Beasley, who's now our District 12 school board member, being involved in restorative justice. So it sounds like he's very genuinely enthusiastic about restorative justice. He thinks it's the greatest thing ever he wants to do to Williamson County Schools. And he's largely been successful. So Scarlett talked about circles, listening circles, community circles. This is a FOIA that came back that's talking about instructions for teachers to implement these listening circles in their classrooms. And it's done on a daily basis. Slides are provided, and I'll show you what those look like. And here it talks about a shallow end versus a deep end. So they ask a shallow end question, and then they work their way to the deep end. And a lot of these questions, especially the deep end ones, are an invasion of privacy. It's probing for information about your family's personal life. And kids mostly want to please their teachers, and they're going to give up that information. And I've had teachers also talk about the listening circles and how awkward that was, and how one child even outed to his class that his parents were alcoholics. That has no business being brought up in a classroom. But there you have it. And then I thought this email was also interesting, and it's talking about the community circles with our 8th grade students, where to find them. But then down here, adding time to HR before first period. I'm aware, so quote, I'm aware of concern that this is cutting into instructional time by having community circles during first period. I'm looking at adding 5 minutes to HR during first period and taking away 5 minutes during 8th grade Thrive. So the thing that just knocks me out of my chair here is that they classify these listening circles as more important than actual instruction, which goes back to what Scarlett and Ryan were saying. First of all, when does a teacher have time to convene a community circle when there's somebody commits an infraction? They don't have time. So what's the alternative? They're just not going to punish it. And that's probably what happens 9 times out of 10. It just goes unpunished and there's no consequences. But here, by Bill Harlan, principal of Brentwood Middle School, he is prioritizing community circles over actual learning. And what do these look like? Here's a community circle guide for Q1. On September 13th, the shallow end question was, if you had a day off from school and you could do anything, what would you do? And the deep end, tell us about your after school routine. Later in the month, what are 2 qualities you look for in a friend? And then what is a red flag that turns you away from a friend? November 8th, if you could change one event in history, what would it be? Well, considering the kids are probably marinating in critical race theory, I'm sure it takes the turn towards social justice. And the deep end, if you could fix any of the world's problems today, which would you choose? Again, this is not instruction. This is not learning. This is social emotional learning and restorative practices. November 15th, if you had one meal every day for the rest of your life, what it would be. And then deep end, do you think honesty is the best policy or is ignorance bliss? Moving on, tracking the teachers. So this is an initial question that was asked by Dr. Megan Sanders, principal of Centennial High School, saying, "Hi, Vicki, how can I pull a report from Skyward that will show me the number of referrals each teacher wrote last year?" And then she responds with a more generic answer. And then she says, "Hi again, no, I meant discipline referrals. Is there a way to pull Skyward discipline so I can see how many times a discipline referral was submitted by a teacher?" And that's where this email thread gets interesting to me, because it belies a lack of faith and respect for the judgment of teachers, checking up on the teachers. And if you go a little bit further, yeah, so she sent me this. I emailed her back and asked for the race column to show for all students. I know who is B, but I want it on the report. Definitely some patterns and implicit bias going on. To which Josiah Holland responds, "Wow, this is good data." So what we're seeing here is a teacher being second guessed. And if a teacher gives too many expulsions to a student that happens to be of a different skin color, then that teacher appears to be, is judged at the least, and I don't know if reprimanded at the worst. So teachers are absolutely disincentivized to discipline their students, and certainly disincentivized to report it. So who is this director of the Williamson County Schools Alternative Learning Center? It is Josiah Holland. And if you look at his social media profiles, each one mentions restorative practices here on LinkedIn, and then also restorative practitioner here on Twitter. So he's not trying to hide it. And again, he may think it's the greatest thing ever, but the evidence that we're seeing across the country of things we're hearing from teachers and parents and students is completely the opposite. When you start looking on Williamson County Schools website and you do a search for restorative practices or restorative justice, there's not much. You're not going to find the PDIS or the MTSS or any of those things, save for one instance, and that's on the Alternative Learning Center website, all the way at the bottom. And it talks about the ALC uses the restorative practices framework. The purpose of restorative practices is to teach students to build community, manage conflict, and repair harm caused by personal choices. These are all the same buzzwords that Scarlett talked about. They're being used across the country. This is nothing unique or original in Williamson County Schools. All ALC staff have been trained thoroughly in the restorative practices framework. To achieve these restorative purposes, the staff utilizes such daily interventions as morning meetings, academic advisories, restorative circles, restorative conferencing, and impromptu conferences. So now I'm going to look at WCS culture. And there's a culture of a deep desire to look really good on paper. And I'll show you what I mean with these two instances. Most of us remember in December of 2021, the news story broke about a Williamson County elementary school teacher. He was teaching the first grade at Fairview Elementary. He was arrested in Murray County, just south of us, on 20 plus counts of sexual abuse and 7 counts of rape. And just to read the Daily Mail, he's accused of sexually abusing 2 relatives under the age of 13 from 2016 to 2021. He was named Teacher of the Year at Fairview Elementary in 2020. And we'll go into his history within Williamson County Schools briefly. So if you go back into Williamson County Schools, the news, and you do some searches for his name comes up a lot. He was apparently considered kind of a star teacher. This is from 2004. his classroom is doing a Mars mission for third graders. And here at the very beginning of the article, Chapman's Retreat elementary teacher Jonathan Ulrich said his third grade class had the look of disbelief. And then again at Chapman's Retreat, talking about his third grade class, reading the adventure story Stone Fox. And any parent is going to read this article and say, this is great, I have such an awesome teacher. Here's a school spotlight at Chapman's Retreat Elementary. I'm talking about, again, he's mentioned Jonathan Ulrich's class at Chapman's Retreat Elementary is in the picture. Here he is on the far left in that spelling bee picture. And then he gets promoted from Chapman's Retreat to being the principal of Longview Elementary. And so here it is talking here, he has a doctorate in education. He taught at Chapman's Retreat, was assistant principal at Heritage Middle and Bethesda Elementary. And he's basically the greatest thing ever. But then this comes up, and this right here should be the end of the story for this individual Williamson County Schools. As a principal, he was removed on a disciplinary measure for sexual harassment of at least one female that was working with him. That should have been it, fired. But instead, he was moved to the central office and a new principal was installed. And it says that Charles will have to repair parental trust in the Longview Elementary community in Spring Hill after Ulrich was yanked from the top spot early in May for comments of a sexual nature to one or more female employees, a letter in Ulrich's personal file indicates. So right there, it's talking about they have to rebuild parental trust. But what does he do? He goes to the central office and he works for a year or so. And then they put him into the first grade teaching at Fairview Elementary. And here he is, elementary school teacher of the year in February of 2020 at Fairview Elementary. And then 1 year later, this happens. So this is egregious. He never should have been there. He should have been fired. He shouldn't have been. A lot of 6- and 7-year-olds should never have been put under his charge. And this to me is an indicator of the climate within Williamson County Schools. The kids are never first. This guy was shuffled around and he was kept on, even when they knew there were problems. This is an article from the Tennessee Conservative News. It says in a Facebook post yesterday, said, outraged parents demand to know why Ulrich was allowed to teach in a classroom and even named Teacher of the Year in 2020 after an investigation into sexual harassment claims against him in 2014 led to his removal as principal of Longview Elementary School in Spring Hill. And according to the Tennessean, Ulrich was suspended for 3 days without pay at the time. And you guys can read the rest. And then it talks about here, he is now charged with a Class B felony of sexual exploitation of a minor, possession of over 100 images, and a Class D felony of 2 additional counts of sexual exploitation as a minor. These charges come in addition to 27 charges that were filed back in December, which included 8 counts of rape of a child, 9 counts of aggravated sexual battery, and 1 count of especially aggravated sexual exploitation of a minor. Here's another incident. At Scales Elementary, a janitor was climbing up into the ceiling tiles and spying on young girls and teachers and getting off on it. His name was Victor Manuel Alvarado, and he was contract labor from a workforce contractor that's based in Ohio. So if you start looking around, here's an article from the Williamson Herald. You can always count on the Herald for this kind of reporting, but it talks about Scales Elementary contract custodian charged. And you read down into, you know, how the whole thing unfolded. They called an impromptu meeting of parents. So applause to Dr. Looney. You know, he called the parents immediately. 400 came. And parents who had just been notified by email and telephone 2 hours before the meeting were visibly upset. And I thought this was interesting. One parent who requested not to be notified commended the district for acting promptly and being open. But were they? Oh, look, they had warning signs. A parent had already complained, and other parents too, and says, this Brentwood parent said she filed a complaint with the school last year when her daughter was in 2nd grade. She said Victor Alvarado of Antioch approached her daughter on a few occasions, sweeping his broom across her feet, singing to her and following her around. Myers said she wasn't the only parent who complained. So no, I'm not going to give WCS any credit for the swift and appropriate response and accountability to parents, because warning signs and complaints were absolutely missed here. And oh, by the way, the same thing happened in that book, Why Meadow Died, at Broward County Schools. So, but this goes a step further. There's a memorandum written by Deputy Mark Colburn that talks about the day that this janitor was found out and reported. And that was also the same day that they had this massive parent meeting. And I'll let you read it for yourself. I didn't do the underlining, but I'll give you the high points. On January 10th of 2014, the HVAC repairman informed the school deputy that he believed there's a peeping Tom in the girls' bathroom. And so the deputy told the principal. Principal's response was, I want to handle this incident in-house, which is, I don't want it out. So the deputy goes and requests the HVAC repairman, investigates a little bit, and believes that a crime had for sure taken place. At this point, the principal's off doing the spelling bee, and he goes to the vice principal. She says she's trying to write an email to the central office. The vice principal reiterates they want to handle this internally and not criminally. The deputy says, I can't do that. He does the right thing and he notifies his chain of command of a criminal act. The vice principal leaves a voicemail for central office, and Dr. Looney quickly, under damage control, calls a parent meeting to get ahead of the PR nightmare that's about to ensue. He does not inform law enforcement. And at the end of this memorandum, the deputy talks about 400 parents then trampled his crime scene. So no, not really open and accountable to parents at all, or transparent. And then if you read the case overview from the Williamson County Sheriff's Office, it's just disgusting. They investigated the ceiling tiles of multiple bathrooms, and they found specimen and pubic hair in multiple bathrooms where this guy was hanging up in the ceiling tiles and watching young girls. So moving on, the other way that we can figure out if restorative practices are in Williamson County Schools is from the top. What's our superintendent saying? Well, this is him giving a briefing in 2019, and he's talking about, of course, everybody's just hyper fixated on race. So he's breaking down the numbers by race. And then he starts talking about, well, here it is, response to instruction and intervention, and you've got tier 1, 2, and 3. Now it's not called an MTSS, but there it is, tier 1, 2, and 3. It is an MTSS. It's being briefed in Williamson County Schools. From the same presentation, restorative practices is. And it talks about the goal of restorative practices to manage conflict and tensions by repairing harm and restoring relationships. Of course, it always sounds wonderful until you try to implement utopia, which never works. So adverse childhood experiences, this is where they bring in the trauma-informed practices that we talked about. And this ACEs, adverse child experiences, as I could also find on the Tennessee DOE website. Also, another sign of restorative practices is just a hyperfixation on statistics, constantly, percentages. And here you go on the far right, or actually all three of them is in school suspensions. And then he breaks them out by race. How do they compare? how do they compare with other schools, the state, nationally. They just want to know, well, it's all about the reporting. It's all about the statistics. And the statistics we have found, especially in Broward, are always skewed because they're incentivized to skew them. They're disincentivized, especially teachers are disincentivized to report or discipline. So that wraps up my talk about where it is in Williamson County. Again, hopefully our records requests will come in, and then you can find them on our website. It'll be under resources, FOIA requests, and you can read for yourselves, and we'll be sure to put a link into our toolkit. So how can we help? Thank you for tuning in. If you're watching this after the fact, thank you for watching, because the step one is to get smart on this so that when you go and you speak to your school administrator or your teacher or your principal, you can speak smartly on these issues. Because I've found that they love to throw big acronyms, MTSS, PDIS, blah, blah, whatever the new one is. And they want to sound really smart and make you feel dumb as a parent, because not, you are the parent and you are the smartest one when it comes to your child. So never let them throw acronyms at you and make you feel uncomfortable. It's just an acronym. And then when you go in there armed with the information, then you can fire back with actual evidence and statistics. So what you can do is go to our website, momsforlibertywc.org. So if you go through the national website, momsforliberty.org, you'll eventually find us. You can go directly to us with adding the WC for Williamson County.org. And then you go to resources at the top, resource library, and our Restorative Justice Toolkit is now live. Restorative Justice 101 is there. The video I showed at the beginning of this presentation is there. And this will also be posted there by the end of the week, as well as many other links and resources and articles and white papers and toolkits. Even one from Defending Ed, that's an excellent one, is all there for parents. When you need it, it's there and you can find it. This is what our website looks like. You can follow us on social media. If you find our work to be of value to you, then please consider a donation, because that helps to fund our future 101 events. And any questions?
Just a comment. Excellent as usual, Robin. This is a wonderful presentation. I'm saying this for Scarlett and Ryan, and we have Robin's put out such excellent materials. I think they should be done nationally.
Thank you, Chuck. And I think Susan had a question.
There, I am muted. This is Susan. I had a question that's probably mostly for Scarlett, and that is, if I heard you correctly early in your presentation, you said that there were some high schools in Chattanooga, maybe another city, that had some success in getting rid of this nonsense. And I'm wondering what they did. And one of the things that we've had a problem with here is, like, for CRT, they say they're not teaching CRT, but they call it something else, and it's really CRT. I'm wondering if you've had experience with similar things.
Yeah, so the school district is in Gwinnett County, Georgia. And I think the special thing about this district is that as soon as they hired a new superintendent, one of the first things that she did, because she was actually the interim superintendent here in Hamilton County. So once she got her permanent job at Gwinnett County, Georgia, one of the first things that she did was implement restorative practices. And what the parents started seeing is that there was a rise in violence, student-to-teacher violence, student-to-student violence, and disruptive behavior. So they were able to easily link the rise in violence to the restorative practices that she brought when she got hired. So they showed up at school board meetings, they spoke to the superintendent, they spoke to principals, and they were able to get it removed. Well, not entirely removed, it's paused until 2024, I believe, but it's no longer in their school district as of now.
Were there large quantities of parents that showed up, or just a few?
I don't know about the quantities because I've only talked to individual parents, but those individual parents that I've spoken to are part of larger parent groups. So I would imagine that they all kind of, formed their coalition and went to speak at their school board meetings and spoke to their school officials.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Patty, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, well, I had another question too. I wondered if you have any kind of percentage of teachers that have left WCS in the last year, 2 years. If they have given some of their thoughts on why they're leaving to you, they can't take it anymore, what is the status on that situation?
We do have some numbers, but they're just not at the front of my brain, so I don't want to say it. But last year, mid-year, it was a record number of teachers leaving. And the strange thing, and that's, we have a former WCS teacher within our chapter leadership, who can shed a lot of light on the culture. And her comment was, teachers love their students. And to leave them hanging in the middle of the year means something was really bad. And they had, I think, almost 100 teachers leave mid-year, which is really unheard of. And as far as exit interviews, that was a big controversy last year, spring of last year, and that we said, where are the exit interviews? And the teachers are saying there's no exit interviews. They don't want to know why we're leaving. And then some school board members say, well, absolutely, there's exit interviews, but no, not the teachers say no. I tend to believe the teachers. So what we would love is for teachers to reach out and tell us why they're leaving. It's just hard to get a teacher to do that. Ryan, do you have anything for that? You're muted.
Yeah, no, my mousey was not working. It went to sleep. It's bedtime. Teachers, I'm going to tell you, number one, it's discipline. It's lack of ability to control what's going on in their classroom, and then they're getting frustrated because they can't teach. And then they're also, from the teacher's perspective of, we love our students, hopefully not in the ways that you highlighted, but they're frustrated because they see that this stuff's not working, and this stuff is emotionally draining too, by the way. Obviously when you tie in the SEL stuff, which I know you've covered in the past fantastically, and when you start tying in all of this constant emotional draining on a teacher, along with the normal drain of a teaching day, my experience, in fact, I think there were about 4 or 5 other teachers that left last year from that same school I was at, and not going back to teaching. So not like they're leaving to another school district. So my gut feeling with conversations with other people is definitely the behavioral is number one. Certainly when our friend Randy talks about, teachers not paid enough, I've never heard that conversation come up. I mean, in a place here or there, maybe, but that's never a reason why I hear teachers leaving.
I have heard that from a retired school teacher that when there are problems with a teacher, such as the sexual part that you brought up, the assaults, they call it passing the trash. They keep it quiet, but they just recommend them to go to another school. They'll actually write a recommendation for them to go teach somewhere else. So you never know whether you're getting some that they're passing to you, or you're passing them on to somebody else. That's just practice that she told me exists.
All right. Well, nothing surprises me anymore. Thank you, everybody. We're at 1 hour and 40 minutes, so I think we'll wrap it up and let everybody have the rest of their evening. I want to give a special thank you to Scarlett and to Ryan. Both of you gave just such outstanding presentations and insights. And thank you to the rest of you for tuning in. And please, I'll get this posted by the end of the week. Share our toolkit, share this video, share the 101. Because in all of the things in the news right now, critical race theory was the big thing of 2021. Now it's gender ideology. Restorative justice doesn't get talked about very often. And it just sounds so nice that people just gloss over it, but it's dangerous. It's incredibly important. It can be life and death, and it's physical safety of students and teachers. So please shine a light on it, be aware of it, you know the terms to listen for, and equip yourself with knowledge. Thank you again, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you.